We're used to looking for God somewhere far away, in the sky, in books, in churches. We argue about Him, defend Him, deny Him, but we almost never ask the most important question. What if God is closer than we think? What if He's not where we point our fingers, but where we're afraid to look? Humans have always searched for meaning. When they were afraid, they looked for explanations. When they were hurt, they searched for comfort. That is how God appeared, not as an instrument of control, but as a response to the silence of the universe. God gave hope when there was none. He was that quiet voice inside that said, "You are not alone." But over time, faith began to change. Faith turned into a system turned into rules, and rules turned into the fear of making mistakes. Slowly, God became not the one who understands, but the one who is feared. For some, God is a father. For others, a judge. For others, He is energy, law, a path, or even emptiness. But all of these images are only attempts to describe something that cannot be fully expressed in words. We imagine God in our own image because we know no other way. We give Him anger because we feel anger ourselves. We speak about His forgiveness because we desperately need it. Perhaps God is not a person, or perhaps He is greater than any person, greater than any image, name, or definition. If God exists, why does He remain silent? Millions of people ask this question in moments of pain, loss, and injustice. But what if God is not silent at all? What if He speaks through silence? Silence is not emptiness. It is a space where we finally hear ourselves. Sometimes the absence of an answer is the answer. Sometimes silence is an invitation to think, to feel, and to understand. Can God be within us? If we are created by Him, then perhaps a part of Him lives inside us. Not as magic or miracles, but as the ability to love, to feel compassion, to choose, and to create. Every time a person chooses kindness, they move closer to God, not because it is written somewhere, but because they cannot do otherwise. Maybe God is not above us, but between us, between our words and our actions, between what we feel and what we choose to do with those feelings. Maybe God exists in moments rather than places, in honesty instead of rituals, in quiet understanding instead of loud declarations of faith. We often want God to be clear, visible, undeniable. We want signs, miracles, absolute certainty. But certainty leaves no room for choice. And without choice, faith loses its meaning. True faith is fragile. It lives in doubt, not in certainty. It asks questions instead of memorizing answers. And maybe that is why it feels uncomfortable. People often ask, "Can you believe without religion?" Without churches, traditions, and rules? Yes, you can. But it is much harder, because then you are not accountable to a book, a system, or other people. You are accountable only to your conscience. That kind of faith does not shout. It does not try to prove anything. It does not argue endlessly. It simply exists, quietly, deeply, personally. And maybe God is not something you believe in. Maybe God is something you live. If God exists, why is there suffering? Why pain, loss, injustice? This question has no simple answer. Anyone who claims to have one is probably lying to themselves or to others. But perhaps suffering is not punishment. Perhaps it is the cost of freedom. Without freedom, there is no love. Without choice, there is no meaning. Without risk, there is no life. A world without pain would also be a world without courage, without compassion, without growth. God could have created a world without suffering, but then He would have created a world without real humans, without the ability to fall and rise, to break and heal, to lose and still choose kindness. Sometimes God feels absent, especially when we need Him most. But maybe absence is not abandonment. Maybe it is space for us to become something more than we were before. In the end, God is deeply personal. Not the God people argue about, not the God used to control or judge, but the God you meet when you are alone with yourself. In moments of silence, in moments of honesty, in moments when you stop pretending. Perhaps God is not an answer. Perhaps God is the question that stays with you your entire life. We can argue about God endlessly, but what matters far more is what that belief does to us. If faith makes a person cruel, fearful, or hateful, something has gone wrong. But if it makes a person more human, more gentle, more attentive to others, perhaps they are closer than they think. And maybe God begins exactly where fear ends. And even after all these thoughts, after all these questions, nothing truly ends here. Because the search itself is part of the answer. We often think that faith, meaning, or God should bring clarity. But maybe their purpose is not to make things simple, but to make us attentive to how we live, to how we treat others, to what we choose when no one is watching. Some people will call this faith. Others will call it philosophy. Others will say it is nothing more than imagination. But names have never been the important part. What matters is direction. Whether we move toward fear or toward understanding, toward judgment or toward compassion, toward noise or toward listening. Maybe God is not found at the beginning of the journey and not at its end, but somewhere in the middle. In the quiet moments we usually ignore, in the pauses between thoughts, in the space where we stop trying to be right. You don't have to be certain. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to explain everything. You only have to stay open. Because perhaps God does not need to be proven or defended or clearly defined. Perhaps He only needs to be noticed. And maybe the closest we ever come to God is not through belief, but through awareness. Through the simple realization that something greater than fear, greater than doubt, greater than loneliness is already here, quietly, patiently, waiting to be seen.